Welcome to Talent Unfiltered, located at the intersection of innovation and all things talent. Talent Unfiltered is presented by Hirewerx. Hirewerx, talent forward. Now, here is your host, Godier.
It is Monday, May 18th, 2020, and welcome to Talent Unfiltered, presented by Hirewerx. I am Ron Godier. Now, today is kind of a special show for us. Special how, you might ask? Well, it's our 10th episode. Well, what does that really mean? Well, according to podcasthost.com, most podcasts, video or otherwise, suffer from a thing called Podfade. And Podfade is what happens around the 6th, 7th, 8th episode. It becomes very difficult to do this all the time. It becomes difficult to find and continue to put out good content. It becomes difficult if you're doing an interview show like this to begin to get people in. Schedules are tough, and everybody's talking about something. You're trying to find content that you think is original and valuable, and sometimes we don't get the feedback that we would like when we're a newer podcast like we are. We don't have a ton of subscribers. I think we've had 12 or 14,000 views so far of the shows that we've done. So not a huge impact. I mean, I'm happy with what we've done, but we don't get that kind of immediate feedback to know, are we covering the right things? Are we doing the right things? So right now it's a best guess. I'm going to give you an opportunity to get in touch with us and let us know the kinds of things you would like to see. Now, the other thing that Podcast Host says is that once you make it past about that 8th episode, it generally signals that you are in it for the long haul, that you are putting in the time, the effort, and making a real attempt to provide valuable content. And that is exactly what we are trying to do. And in fact, over the course of these first episodes, we've been very lucky to have some great guests. They have been thoughtful. They have been funny. They have been insightful, and they have given real opinion and real feelings about talent acquisition, about the future of that, the future of recruitment, what the future of work looks like, what things may look like on the other side of COVID. And speaking of which, I mean, we know that so many of you are being impacted by this. We know that many of you may be out of work. Some of you might have been furloughed, but you're unsure as to whether you're actually going to go back. Some of you may not have a job at all. You may have had to battle COVID, or maybe someone in your family did, and the consequences might not have been good. And I think that these are the kinds of events, these are the kinds of historical events, regardless of how you feel about it, regardless of where you are aligned politically. These are the kinds of events that change the way people look at their lives going forward. And it's really easy to get down. It's really easy to get hung up in the idea that this is a super bad thing, and it is. The loss of human life is tragic. But I will tell you this, and I do believe this wholeheartedly, and I think we're beginning to see signs of it now. This will change. There will be a return to something that looks more normal, something that looks closer to what it was like pre-COVID. It may never be exactly the same. Some of those changes where it's not exactly the same, I think are going to be great. And you'll hear from some people now and in the future, both on this show and on other places, who tell you that there were real opportunities for innovation. We're going to go into some of that today. But just know it is going to get better. It is going to be okay. And together we can find a way. We can find a way through this. Now, before we get started, I do want to let you know that you can connect with the show in a bunch of different ways. You can find us on Facebook, you can find us on Twitter, and you can find us on Instagram. The show is available on Spotify, Buzzsprout, and Soundcloud, and there is a YouTube version, a video version on YouTube that some of you are watching right now. Now, if you want to get in touch with the show, I mentioned this earlier, if you want to get in touch with the show and let us know the kinds of topics or content that you would like to see, it's really easy to do. Just send us an email at showinfo@talentunfiltered.com. That's showinfo@talentunfiltered.com. We'd love to get questions, topics, feedback, anything that you'd like to see us cover. Now, the links to all of our social media platforms and everything are in the comments section down below. And honestly, if you like what we do, then like, subscribe, share, and turn on the notification button so that you don't miss any content from us. All right, let's get rolling. So the whole purpose of Talent Unfiltered is to let HR and talent leaders and practitioners and other business leaders from all types of organizations hear from and learn from forward-thinking professionals about how to maximize recruiting efforts, even in times like this. Now, I happen to believe that if you can innovate now, if you can find ways to change what you do now in an innovative and new way, that the benefits will be dramatic and they will be long-lasting. One example of that is a person that I love working with. I happen to be a partner in an organization called Hacking HR. If you're not familiar with it, check out your city, see if there's a chapter in your area and get involved. Enrique Rubio is the founder of Hacking HR. Now, he uses a worldwide network of chapters and partners across the globe to try to help build and truly reshape the future of work. Now, when I had Enrique on the show, he talked about how our perception has been changed by this pandemic.
Have we ever gone through so much change in such a short period of time? Never before. You know, if you think about 9/11, this was a peak of a crisis, and it took some time for the U.S. to get into war with Afghanistan and then Iraq in 2003. So these things took some time to happen. Mm-hmm. But what we're going through right now, the changes and the disruption of everything we were used to doing just 3 weeks ago, and changing all that in such a short period of time is just so complex, so mind blowing. So it generates a lot of anxiety, as I mentioned before. So I am feeling that, and that's part of what I'm feeling from everybody that I'm speaking with. You know, there are a lot of people that are very hopeful about the day after tomorrow, but we know that whenever we get out of this, yes, we will bounce back, and the expectation and the hope is that we do better. But this transition, these times that we're living in right now, they are very complex, right? And what I'm hoping is that we understand that many more people will need to get together in communities. I've always said this, right? I mean, 2.5 years ago, when I started Hacking HR, I said the kind of problems that we are dealing with in the world today are just so complex that they won't be resolved by a single country or company or city and whatnot. And that's putting evidence today when we see the complexity of the coronavirus and the fact that many countries are resolving this in an isolated way instead of getting together somehow and trying to collaborate more, help each other out more. Even within the U.S. now, governors are trying to scramble for resources, but they are also trying to see how can we collaborate so that we are not fighting for the same pocket of resources, right? So anyway, the point is that I think in my conversations with people, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of hope too, but I think we all know that the next few weeks will be very, very complicated for everybody.
Now, Kelly Keegan is the VP of HR for the Built-In companies. For those of you that aren't familiar, Built-In is a web platform that started as a social community for startups, and it evolved into a very rich, very successful recruiting tool for technology companies. Now, I had Kelly on the show, and we were talking about the future of work. And in that conversation, she relayed to me how she envisions work life changing as a result of the pandemic.
Here's the thing, like sometimes change is unavoidable and sometimes change is forced. And this is going to be one of those scenarios where change is forced. And as painful as all of this is, I'm hoping that there's a lot of really good change that comes out as a result. Same thing with our healthcare system. Like the flexibility and adjustments that have been made on the benefit side of things, like whether that is just extension of offerings that all of, our Blue Cross Blue Shield had an extension of if somebody gets laid off and like their coverage and what that looks like. And I think there's an opportunity for however all of this shakes out over the next few months for somebody to, many people to really step in and force that change to continue. Thinking about all of these things that people said couldn't be done or like that there's a right way to do them. Like, look at the fact that you have people like these late night talk show hosts that are just leading their shows virtually. Like
Sure.
Saturday Night Live was literally filmed from everyone's home. Like this idea of like, you have to be in a studio and doing those things.
Mm-hmm.
Like if this is the opportunity for people to realize that all these things that people said can't be done, or like it like wasn't the right environment for it, if it gives people that momentum to try things, or set a new way of doing something, I'm all about that. I think it's cool.
Now, as I said at the top, we've been very, very lucky to get great guests. In our very first show, we were able to have Lou Adler on the show. And Lou is a very sought-after speaker. If you are in HR or talent, there's a good chance you've seen a video of his, you've read a book of his, or maybe you've seen him at LinkedIn Talent Connect. A really smart guy, been in the business a long time, has a lot to offer. And we were talking about what made recruiting different today than it was before, and what made it exactly the same, and where he thought people ought to spend and focus their efforts to get better at this. And he said something about candidates that to me was so obvious, I couldn't believe that I didn't think about this on a regular basis, and I thought we'd share that with you here today.
What drives personal satisfaction on the job? It's the work that people do. So how many people, if you ask a candidate, I don't care if the person's an entry-level customer success manager with 2 years experience, do you really know what this job is before you take the job? I bet most of them don't know the job. They just have a general sense of it. When they get in the job, they said, oh my God, I didn't know I had to actually work with customers and actually resell. Number one, have them make sure they understand the product and also sell them additional services and support we have. I didn't know that was the job. Well, so I don't care if you're executive search or not, if at the core level of human beings, whether it's a 22-year-old or a 55-year-old, that person gets satisfied by the actual work they do. And if you, the recruiter, offer a job without you knowing what that work is and what intrinsically motivates that candidate, the probability of that person being satisfied in the job is probably 30%. 30% will be partially satisfied, 30% will be aggravated. Why did I take this job? That's what the statistics show. I don't care if you're 22 or 102, because now probably 102-year-old people are getting jobs. So I think to me, it's just understanding of how people change jobs, people take jobs, and how people excel when they're in the job. Human nature did not change because of the internet. Darwin's theory of evolution, now you might disagree with Darwin's theory of evolution. I happen to agree with it. It did not change. People did not fundamentally change. What changed is it's now easier to change jobs. And are companies less loyal? Yeah, maybe they are. But human nature is not any different. Hey, if you give somebody a good job who they intrinsically motivated to do, and you get a support structure that allows them to be successful, a manager that develops and promotes them, you're going to have a successful career. And to me, if the candidate doesn't know that, if the recruiter doesn't know that, no hiring manager doesn't know those issues, they shouldn't be making a decision.
And we have tried to bring you people from different industries and viewpoints as guests here on Talent Unfiltered. Different industries, different vantage points, different seniority levels in organizations to try to give you the broadest picture that we possibly could. Case in point, a couple of weeks ago, we brought in a gentleman by the name of Jeremy Reymer. Now, Jeremy is the CEO and founder of a company called DriverReach. And DriverReach is a really wonderful ATS and recruitment marketing platform for the transportation industry. And in the course of the interview, Jeremy started talking about the things that he felt were really important, not only of tools that were out there, but also of the way we as professionals in this space interact. And I think this is going to sound really familiar to you.
You've got to provide a good experience for the driver, and always thinking about the whole process from their perspective. When there are things that we have to do in a regulated industry like this, there are boxes that need to get checked. There are certain steps in the process that have to be done and done properly. But that's all behind the curtain. What faces the driver should be as seamless a experience as possible. And so, that although I built technology with DriverReach to accomplish that, going back to the days of my staffing company beforehand, I recognized how important that was. And just, you can scale better that way as well. You've got to have a good, smooth process, have those processes documented, hire really good people to execute those. And then from a leadership standpoint, just be open and transparent and empower people to to grow and learn and lead and have a radical candor sometimes in your communication with them. And you can really build something special from that. And when I started building technology to help us to operate more efficiently at my staffing company, I recognized that a lot of what I had built from a technology standpoint, I knew that I could bottle that and really market that to the trucking industry. And it was just far more modern, more user-friendly, and just it was needed. It was a needed, there was some competition, there were some gaps in competition.
Sure.
And so I was able to take advantage of that. And so far it's been great. I think it starts though, to your original question, just the driver experience. You've got to provide them with an easy experience, make it easy for them.
Now, I'm a big proponent of remote work. I happen to think it's a great thing. I think it gives people freedom. I do understand that there are times when it is hard for some people to be productive in a remote environment. I get that. But I do think this is going to be much closer to the new normal than what we have seen in the past. In fact, I think companies who had not traditionally advocated for this are going to see this as part of continuity planning, part of how they keep their workforce safe. Because let's face it, there's a good chance we're going to have another round of COVID in the fall, and companies are using this time and this experience with remote workers to change the way they operate to be more prepared when it comes around again. That said, candidate preferences will probably continue to shift towards a more remote option. Case in point, had a gentleman on our show a few weeks ago by the name of Hung Lee. Now, Hung is a brilliant guy out of the UK. He has a great podcast too, and I'm going to give him a little shameless promotion here. Great podcast called Recruiting Brain Food. If you haven't been out to check it out, I would suggest you do that. It's a great podcast and newsletter, but he's also the founder of a company called Workspace.io. And Workspace.io is a really interesting matching tool for candidates in the technology space. I would go check that out again. That's Workspace.io. But in our conversation, we were talking about how candidate preferences might change with respect to work, with respect to remote work. And here's what Hung had to say.
Basically, because Workshape's always been dealing with, if you like, remote friendly or remote literate population. These are software engineers. So they have always been ahead of the game in terms of ahead of the trend that the wider market will be in. Definitely, we've seen that organizations that have had success are the ones that are able to offer remote working way and above any a co-location. So I think that will replicate across to different functions in different fields where people can work remotely. The job can be delivered from anywhere. Companies that are able to offer that as a default will definitely outcompete those that can't. And in fact, I would say that companies are going to learn to do that. I don't see any recalcitrant businesses that are sticking out and saying, sure, we're definitely going to get all these office workers back in. They're going to recognize that actually I'm spending all of this business rent on an office that's empty right now. That's what companies are getting right now, right? Yeah. And they're going to think, that was dumb to ever commit to that. Why don't I just get rid of the office and find people that can work remotely? And that's what's going to happen. So I think this is a huge shift. It's positive in many respects because it means that we can get rid of things that no one enjoys. No one enjoys the commute. No one enjoys massively high price rental costs and office space costs and stuff like that. All that's because we were obsessed with getting people in the building. But a lot of work does not require that. And if people can work from wherever they want, it doesn't have to be from home, but from whatever location they happen to be in, that should mean that local economies will benefit.
I've always been a person who tries to recognize people who I think are smarter and better at things than I am. I look at that as an opportunity to learn. Marinus van Driel is one of the smartest people I have ever met. He is a former rugby player. He's from South Africa. He is an associate partner at Aon, and he and his teams have built candidate engagement and assessment software for companies around the world, including Vodafone. When he came on the show, we were talking about how to prepare yourself for the day, the eventual day, and it will happen that this is over and you are heading back out to a workforce that may look significantly different than it did before the pandemic.
So one of the things that we're thinking about now within the context of my team is how we can connect people that have skills and have capabilities that come from one industry to job opportunities in other areas, and using data to link people up in a very, 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 very clear way. And it's, I think that type of thinking is something that we'll see more of and that organizations can engage in more often. And then lastly, I think just on the individual level too, I think for folks that are in a position where their job has maybe been either subjected to a layoff, or folks are subject to furlough. I think that the key thing at the individual level is looking at ways in which you can potentially reskill yourself right now, looking at ways in which you can adapt and find other opportunities, and certainly in ways finding ways by which you can just embrace some of the things that may not have been opportunities in the past.
Finally, we had the pleasure of having Wade Burgess on the show a week or so ago. Wade is the former VP of Talent Solutions at LinkedIn. He is the former CEO of a really innovative gig economy company called ShiftGig. He is a Forbes Technology Council member, and he has just started as the Chief Revenue Officer for a great company down in Austin, Texas, called Rev.com. Now, in addition to sharing his feelings about what things you should be working on to get better, he also gave us some insight into what he thinks the economy and the workplace is going to look like once we emerge from this forced shutdown.
Like everything, there are pros and cons. I think we'll all see. Look, we're all guessing. To be clear, none of us have been through this before. It looks like, though, that the initial part of what's called the on-demand or the flexible workforce is going to be company driven for a while, and that's good and bad, but for the worker, probably not ideal. Like, I think companies, especially those companies who have had to furlough or let a lot of people go, are going to be reticent to bring them all back quickly. And I think that they'll bring them back in more flexible ways, more as contractors, more as temporary, more as on-demand work, to not have to take on that full obligation cost-wise. Initially, when the governments of pretty much the entire world have shut everyone down, it's not like companies did something wrong or workers did something wrong. This was a very unprecedented thing. So bringing that commitment level financially back on quickly to companies, I don't think is something. I think this is going to be a real slow on-ramp, and specifically for full-time work. So I think just by the very nature of supply demand, I think that the demand is going to be much less full-time and more flexible in its nature. So that's good and bad. I think the good to that on the demand side is I think that demand is also going to be much more open to a person who desires a more flexible work environment. And they're going to be much more open to that person who being in an office 5 days a week isn't really ideal or suitable to their life. So I think now on the supply side, I think I'm very excited about suddenly pretty much everyone has learned how to deal with a different set of flexibility than they were used to before. And those people who security was their concern, suddenly our mindset has shifted quite a bit and realized, wow, I could actually do a lot more. I'll give an example. Most of my professional time during this pandemic has been, I serve on, I'm on the board of a few companies and as an advisor to several companies. I've mostly been doing that. And I guess I would probably describe myself during this window mostly as a gig worker. It's short windows of times. It's a 4-hour board meeting, or it's a 30-minute call about, wow, how do we handle this one thing? Or what do we do about that? Or how do we make this hard decision? Context switching all day long and working with maybe 5 companies in one day.
Sure.
I believe that will become more and more the norm. People who have, sets of expertise in whatever capacity that is, working in the way that we saw, the gig economy actually really started more in the hourly and on-demand workforce. And I think we'll see it more and more move into the professional space as well.
Well, that's going to do it for us today. Normally, I would take a second here and I would thank our guest for being on with us today. And while I am grateful for everybody who has been a guest and those guests that we have coming up, I really want to take a moment and thank you. Listening, watching, subscribing means a lot. We'd like to hear more from you. We'd like you to share this with everybody that you know in the space if you think they'll be able to get value out of it. And we definitely want to hear from you. So let me give you a couple of ways that you can do that. So if you like what we do, you can like, subscribe, and share on your platform of choice. You can also connect with me or the show on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, or you can just find me on LinkedIn. You can also email the show if you would like at showinfo@talentunfiltered.com. Now, a couple of quick programming notes. We will be off next week. It is Memorial Day weekend, and we are going to take a mostly well-deserved break and try to recharge the batteries. It's been a harrowing 8 or 10 weeks for all of us, and I think we could all use a break. But we will be back at it on Monday, June 1st, when Ellen Boy, the president and CEO of the Women in Trucking Association and a real champion for diversity and inclusion, joins us here on Talent Unfiltered. And then on Monday, May 8th, Dr. Helen Sun, former CTO at JP Morgan and former CTO at Stats Perform, will join us to share her view on hiring from the C-suite. Until then, stay safe.